it is true that it takes just as much work to build $1 billion company as it does to build a $30 million business, which is what we sold our last one for. And I think part of the reason for that is because if you have a big vision, it's big enough for everyone else's hopes and dreams to be inside of it. And there's this compounding flywheel effect.
This podcast is sponsored by Pragmatic Solutions, the player account management platform chosen by today's smart betting and gaming operators. Don't let technical constraints delay you from achieving your business goals. Expand your business, boost your margins, and dominate the market in any leading regulated jurisdiction with our powerful, flexible, and secure iGaming platform. Enjoy its extensive marketing tools, compliance protection, real-time data, and a wide portfolio of over 1,000 industry providers. It's time to upgrade your technology. Let Pragmatic Solutions show you the modern approach. Visit pragmatic.solutions and join the smart thinkers.
This podcast is brought to you by Pragmatic Play, a leading game developer providing player favorites to the most successful brands across the industry. With an award-winning multi-product portfolio of slots, live casino, bingo, virtual sports, and more, Pragmatic Play is powering up new possibilities of play through one single API. Visit pragmaticplay.com and discover your favorite every time.
And bingo, bango, bongo, we are back at the vested interest here with Lloyd and Benjie. Lloyd, we have a week and a half to go. You're in New York at the moment. Can you give us the report from the spot at the moment? What's the weather like? How's it going over there?
It has been freezing until just a few days ago. It has very much started warming up. We're entering some nice, early spring weather or so. So hopefully the current situation holds for you guys. It's lovely right now.
Yeah, we've been lucky in the last couple of years here with the weather. Hopefully we'll bring the luck with us over from Malta. And Benjie, have you booked the edition yet over in New York, or where are you staying?
You know what? I don't know where I'm staying yet in New York. I've got to sort that out actually. So I'll be sure to let you know once I figure it out. Probably somewhere near the conference itself.
That's a good idea. We have a week and a half to go essentially for next New York. The conference is looking really strong this year. I made a post on LinkedIn the other day that we've heard a lot of murmurs of the industry over in the US, kind of many exits taking place and the industry shrinking over there. But if we look at our numbers for next New York coming up now, we are up something like 25% in delegate registrations. There's a lot of interest around the show this year, up in partnership, up in sponsorships. And if we are to take that as a bit of a temperature check, we can definitely conclude that the industry is alive and well over in the United States. So
I think they're coming here because I think they're coming to see the vested interest live and in person at the next conference. I think that's why they're lining up and buying the tickets.
Yes. After the line that we had outside of G2E, then definitely, it's not one to be missed here coming up, which will be the March edition of the vested interest. Nonetheless, guys, let's jump into the episode of today. We have a really exciting episode today. We'll be guested later on in the episode by a true industry legend over in North America, in Justin Park, who is building this really exciting challenger brand in Betty, seemingly kind of beating the giants over there. And I want to kind of use that as a lead-in into our first topic today, which brings up a question we talked about before, which is there space for these type of challenger brands? And so, Lloyd, if you think about now going into 2025 and beyond, FanDuel, DraftKings, they own 80% of the sports betting market in the United States currently, aggregated. It seems to be a bit of a settled market, let's say, on the sports betting side of things. But just as an open-ended question, do you think we'll see more kind of examples of the Bettys of this world and Justin Parks creating these sunshine stories? And why do you think he's been successful?
Why do I think Justin has been successful is probably everything to do with him as a founder and nothing to do with the particular avenue he happens to be taking at a time. So I don't want to extrapolate really anything, honestly, from Justin's success and use that to imply that there is or is not opportunity in iGaming. This is not his first company. He's been successful in others. I'm sure once he comes on, for audience members who haven't met him before, they'll quickly see why he tends to succeed in his entrepreneurial endeavors and capital raising endeavors. I think, it seems tough to imagine there being much room or much demand for someone else to do things exactly the way the market leaders are doing it. I think from that sense, there probably is not a ton of room or demand for another B2C operator on the casino or sports betting side that is, for all intents and purposes, at best trying to copy what FanDuel and DraftKings are doing. But I think there's certainly room for new people to do things in new ways. We're currently seeing, as we discussed on, I think, our last episode, we were previewing some topics around the CFTC and regulated event contracts. I think at our last episode, Robinhood had maybe briefly mentioned that they were thinking about wading into the waters. And I think we all discussed here that we would expect any CFTC regulated products to skew a little more institutional and long duration, not as much as a substitute for micro betting and same game parlays and things like that. And at least since our last episode, things seem to be moving relatively in that direction. And I think the core competencies for someone, let's say, offering, sports events futures contracts that are traded in a more financial way, or maybe are traded by institutional investors, probably has a different skill set and a different branding than a traditional sportsbook or casino. It remains to be seen where everything goes in crypto land right now. Bitcoin was very much up, and now it's a little bit down from where it was, but still very much up from where it was a year ago. And in addition to talking about sports related futures contracts, we hear and see a lot of product development in and adjacent to the crypto space. Will Bitcoin price be higher or lower 5 minutes from now? That's the type of wager or investment, or whatever you want to call it, that probably existing sports betting and iCasino users could be cross-sold to and from quite easily. And certainly many of the unregulated offshore crypto sports books and casinos blend traditional casino gaming and sports betting with something more along the lines of these, synthetic short-term crypto investment products. And again, that is an area that has probably a totally different skill set than the core competency involved in running a traditional sports betting or iGaming operation. So my two answers to your question are: Justin has succeeded because of who he is as a founder, and certainly I think there's room to always see new entrants, but really they have to, I think, should be people who are thinking about things differently, have a different angle or a different orientation. But I certainly would not say that the entire real money gaming ecosystem in the U.S. has solidified, and that there aren't going to be any players in the future who have an outsized impact that don't have one today.
Brilliant. And let me just jump in there and lead up to handing over the question to you, Benjie. Doesn't it seem like on the sports betting, on the regulated sports betting side, we talk more about that the market and the dust has settled, let's say, with the 80% market share to FanDuel and DraftKings. However, on the iCasino side of things, there seems to be a lot more opportunity for more brands to play for that market share, where you aren't really targeting this particular sports-focused demographic, male-led 21 to 45, let's say. Whereas on the casino side, and this is where Justin have found success, right, is that he is targeting a female-led demographic, for example. So, Benjie, my lead-up question to you is: do you see a differentiation, perhaps, of sports betting, which kind of, again, the dust somewhat has settled on that vertical, whereas perhaps iCasino is where the opportunity lies for these challenger brands?
Well, look, I mean, I think part of the challenge there is that iCasino is limited on the legislative front within North America, and it's limited to a select number of states and provinces, right? So I think that as we see the expansion of legislated iCasino into multiple additional states in the US and provinces in Canada, that creates more and more opportunity for growth in a vertical that, quite frankly, has better unit economics. You don't have to deal with the risk management issues. And, a lot will happen when you see casino opening up in a more meaningful way in the US, but there's a lot of resistance to that, right? The tribes and the bricks and mortar folks are generally opposed to widespread expansion of casino within the US and other parts of North America. So we'll have to see how that plays out. But as a general statement, sure, if we see additional expansion in that regard, then I think there's more opportunity for challenger brands on the casino side, which is less mature in the US market, than on the sports betting side, which is more mature in the US market. But we're just talking about the legislated space. And I think when we talk about challenger brands, you've got to differentiate in the sense that, look, we're still in the early days of real money gaming becoming mainstreamed in North America, right? We're 5, 6, 6.5 years into it or whatever it may be. It remains early days, right? And to Lloyd's point, I think it would be very difficult for someone to come in and try and unseat a DraftKings or a FanDuel, if not impossible. That being said, I do think that if you have expertise in a specific region or a specific state, where perhaps a FanDuel or a DraftKings is either inactive and or less active, I think there are opportunities for folks to create market-leading brands in select jurisdictions. I think that's something to look out for in the years ahead. But beyond that, you have the entire movement of real money gaming, which includes, of course, the sweeps and the picks business and the fantasy and now the prediction markets and what will be the next big thing? It's going to be something. I don't know what it's going to be, but there will be something else that comes to fruition and there will be a leader within that category, right? And, look, you still see the underdogs and bettors of the world trying or at a minimum paying lip service, if not trying desperately to find a path to a new audience within legislated sports betting. I think that's a really tough nut to crack, but folks are still trying to crack it, and hopefully we can be proven wrong and someone can make that happen. But I think that where we're going to see that type of evolution of new brands is going to be within verticals potentially that we're not even familiar with yet.
Two just quick things I would add. Agree with all of that. DraftKings and FanDuel have made a number of acquisitions over the last couple of years and generally acquired much of the tech and engineering and product talent from those companies. But some of the people who worked at those acquirees did not take the jobs at DraftKings and FanDuel and instead decided to take jobs at Underdog and Better and Sleeper and Prize Picks. And at least the people who I know personally and know well in those categories, these are not people I would bet against. These are people whose opinions I trust enormously when it comes to things like who's on the cutting edge of product development and who has the least technical debt and the most agile architecture. And so I do think there is something to be said for the fact that while probably most of the people acquired at Sports IQ and Simple Bet and Jackpocket are working at DraftKings, not all of them are, and some of them are working at, decided to work at some of these challenger brands instead, and I think that says something. Also, just quickly going back, I in remembering more and just bringing up the Betty site, I do remember, there is one specific thing that did stick out to me in the days of Betty's launch. Keep in mind, Betty launched in Ontario, and there, for the most part, they were sort of there on day one, toe-to-toe with many other brands. When we talk about new entrants in the U.S., sometimes we're thinking about a new company trying to gain market share in a state where presumably millions of people already have DraftKings and FanDuel accounts. But that was not the situation with Betty. Ontario is a much newer regulated market. And one of the things that stuck out, I think, to anyone who looked at some of their early renderings was that their UX was just better and nicer than every single multi-billion-dollar iGaming company. One thing I very specifically remember, we'll see what Justin says later on, is he had felt at the time, and this might not resonate with people outside the US. I don't know if the UX changes there. But at the time, I remember Justin pointing out that many online casino companies were using a Netflix-like user interface. And by that, he meant many, many small thumbnails on the screen in many different rows and columns that you can all scroll through at the same time. And he had thought that HBO Max, which has a different UX, very few but large movie poster style, maybe only 2 or 3 on the entire screen at one time UX, he thought that was more apropos for an iGaming audience that was looking to minimize decision fatigue and find a game to play as quickly as possible and who maybe didn't want to be inundated with 25 slot machine options all on the same screen at once. And I think the renderings and then the product itself were very consistent with that. And anyone who looked at Betty on day one in Ontario versus Caesars or any of the other big guys, I think would objectively agree. Betty was the one that looked like it was a, multi-billion-dollar company that had the cleanest and sleekest UX that was built according to principles that the younger audience might resonate with more than perhaps the audience that let's say the legacy market leaders had been targeting. And I think those are some examples where without taking a totally different approach, but just being ultra sensitive to sort of a first principles approach. Why do things look like this? Why do they work like this? If we rolled it back to zero and created everything from scratch, would we do things differently? And I think the UX that now some of Betty's competitors have ended up copying from them. And by the way, Netflix has now moved to a more HBO Max-like UX over that time frame as well. It shows that there are founders and product managers out there like Justin who sometimes are just a little more agile and in tune with what the up-and-coming audience wants in ways that, especially if you're a first mover and you're present in the market on day one when you're making impressions on people, I do think those things can have quite a lot of impact. So we'll see when Justin comes on if he actually thinks that did contribute to the success or if that's just an opinion of mine. But I remember that so distinctly from all of my conversations with him in the early days.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to have that conversation with Justin to see where he attributes the kind of main point of success to, whether it is the product or the differentiated brand or marketing and so on and so forth. You cannot build a great company without, at some level, being a great leader. And this is the second point of today that I'm really curious to discuss with you guys, because, of course, you deal with a lot of entrepreneurs that are leading their organizations towards success. So you've seen the successes and the failures on that front often. So I want to talk about what makes a great leader today. There are many different ways to be a great leader, right? Do you kind of create this team feeling in the company where you have the kind of troops behind you to work hard for you as a leader? Or is it more important perhaps to be the type of leader that is brave enough to know when it's time to change stuff, because that can be quite difficult as a empathetic leader, for example. So Benjie, from your experience dealing with startup founders that have driven success, what do you attribute? What attributes do you see as must-haves for a great leader?
Well, I think that the attributes that are the most important at the startup phase may differ a little bit from the attributes that are critical at the scaling phase, right? So why don't we work backwards a bit? At the scaling phase, if you have a company where things are clicking and now you need to amplify and bring on a proper CTO and bring on additional layers of management, I think a critical aspect of leadership, it's not just one thing, it's 1,000 different things that all come together to make somebody a great leader. But at that point, I think it also becomes the ability to create leaders around you and build a team of people around you that you have a lot of confidence in that you can delegate to. And, it's interesting because as a founder in the early stages, you got to be a jack of all trades that does everything, right? There's no task that should be beneath you when you're starting out and raising that capital and building that company and leading by example. And you got to learn the ins and outs of every component of your business so that when you scale, you have that base understanding to pass on that knowledge. But then you've got to be able to loosen the grips and let go and delegate to fantastic people. And I think that the true leaders in our space or in any space that are building market leading companies that are capable of scaling in a meaningful way have the ability to let go, to delegate, to trust the people beneath them who have people beneath them, and to create an organization that is going to scale independent of your involvement in every nitty gritty that goes on. So, in the early stages, we can perhaps get into that because I think the skill sets are a little bit different. In the early stages, you have to have an exceptional attention to the detail and the nitty gritty and being able to forecast and solve problems that you don't even know you're going to need to solve yet, right? And being able to be efficient in raising capital and being able to dot every I and cross every T to really have a granular understanding of the organization that you're building so that you can get to a point where you can attract the type of people that can do the exact same thing for their divisions that you did for the company as a whole when you started it.
I don't have a ton to add to that. I think, especially at the later stages, the point about not only delegating, but making those to whom you delegate feel deputized as leaders themselves, not as receivers of responsibility, but as leaders in the organization themselves. Absolutely critical. Figuring out where you should have direct input, indirect input, no input at all. I think on one of the first Hot 6 panels you guys did in New York, or maybe it was the second one, Jeremy Levine from Underdog was on it, and someone asked him, how do you decide when you hire a new executive what they will do? And Jeremy said, I hire executives so that they can tell me what they should be doing. And I think, the kind of person at a later stage who has that perspective, who can recognize where maybe they're not the smartest person in the room, but then go hire the smartest person in the room and really trust them wholeheartedly. I think that's all critical. I think everything Benjie identified about the nuances that are different at the early stage are accurate. The ones I would probably add to that, maybe slightly more intangible, it's true at every stage, but especially at the early stage, you really have to care. You as the founder or CEO will always represent the upper bound for how much anyone will ever care about your company, your product, your sales pitch, or your success. And so I think people can feel when they are working for and in the room with someone who really, really just deeply cares, who needs this product to succeed, who wants to see it succeed so bad they'll run through walls, they'll stop at nothing. So I think caring a lot and caring deeply for not even the money, but just the success of the endeavor is critical. And then I think the other is some sort of kind of, emotional containment, buffering capability. I think if most founders, CEOs in the early days reached out to their employees or investors every time they felt the most optimistic and also the most pessimistic, that would be a recipe for disaster. Most early stage founders live in a binary world where they're on top of the world and everything's going great and they're going to become a billionaire, or everything's crashing down and it feels like things are failing and they're overwhelmed and nothing is going right. And I think part of that is a byproduct of just caring so much and how hard it is to build a company from scratch. But I think if you were to go to your board or your investors or your employees when you're the most optimistic, that would just lead to a ton of disappointment because nothing ever works out as well as you think it will when you're riding high. And similarly, if when you were the most pessimistic, you went out to your investors or employees and said, the sky's falling, we're going to have to shut the company down, you'd scare people away very quickly. And almost certainly things are not as bad as you think they are when you're sort of in those, lower, more challenged moments. So I think figuring out how to, on the one hand, be honest and transparent and make sure everyone's dealing with accurate information, but also serve as sort of an emotional containment unit that can figure out how and when to relay the proper amounts of enthusiasm or concern to key stakeholders. I think it's really hard to do, especially if you care a lot and if you really, really do care about the company's success. And so I think that is an underappreciated, intangible factor of a leader who can get a company from 0 to 1.
Yeah, to your point, Lloyd, about caring, it was Sam Altman who talked about in Y Combinator, they look for founders that have modeled their company after their personality. So you can kind of tell that you're dealing with a really strong leader if they're able to bring that passion and care into a company to the point where the entire company is modeled after the founder. And that's the type of people that leads from the front, essentially. Benjie, a question for you, though. Isn't there a dichotomy when it comes to leadership where if you read a traditional Simon Sinek book that talks about, leading from the front and leaders eat last and these type of summaries, at the same time, you have leaders like Elon Musk, for example, other leaders such as Steve Jobs, for example, who are just known for being extremely difficult to work with, let's say, but yet they are able to build really successful companies. Why do you think that is? Is there just a different leader for every company, let's say? Is there such a thing as a good and a bad leader?
Yeah, I mean, I can't comment necessarily on the specifics of Elon and Steve. I'm sure they were difficult and are difficult people to work for in the case of Elon. But, look, you can't put leadership in a box. There's different ways to lead your company. There's different ways to go about it. There's mad geniuses that build companies. So, I don't think it's homogenized in terms of personality traits and what the personality traits are that make somebody a great leader. But there's certain essentials, right? Some of those essentials are that you have to be able to move the ball forward and make decisions, right? And a leader might make a good decision, it might make a bad decision, but you got to make decisions. And, the effective leaders aren't sitting on the fence. They're decisive. They make the call, they move forward, And the great leaders will be able to acknowledge when they need to make adjustments and backtrack on a decision that they made and make a different decision and pivot in the right direction. They have to be able to make the hard calls and the hard decisions. Not everything you do is going to be popular. But I think leadership in part is doing things that sometimes are unpopular because it's in the best interests of the company and the best interests of the shareholders that you represent. So, and to Lloyd's point, you do have to care. And, when you look at an Elon and a Steve Jobs, no one can dispute that they care. And no one can dispute that these guys, the types of guys that are all in terms of what they're doing. And, you have that all in podcast, but I think it's very true. When you're building your business, part of leadership is, of course you have to be hardworking, but you have to be 100% committed if you expect your people to be 95% committed.
Absolutely. We are the runner-up here after the All In podcast, catching up quickly to the viewership here, slowly but surely, one viewer at a time. All right, so to our third topic of today, we are really honored and privileged to have with us Justin Park here today and the recording with Betty, the CEO and co-founder. How are you doing today, Justin?
I'm great. Thanks for having me, Pierre.
Brilliant. It's great to have you here, of course. And in the first part of the podcast and episode, we talked about kind of what are the spaces here for the challenger brands in the North American, US and Canadian industry at the moment. And you are obviously the poster boy here for someone who has managed to establish a challenger brand in this very tough market. So I wanted to just kind of lead off today to ask you the question, what do you attribute that success to, that you have managed to carve out a space in this very competitive market for Betty? Is it a kind of brand question? Is it on the marketing side, the product perhaps, or a mix of all?
Yeah, so great question. And I'll start with maybe answers that are a little bit softer and people may not want to hear, but the values of the company and the quality of the team are the main scaffolding, I would say, for our success. And specifically on the value side, being very, very customer centric is huge. Again, kind of a buzzword, but we really do build everything around the customer experience. So how that translates to tactics, several things. One, we only offer slots. So we are obsessed with creating the best slot experience you can have. And in order to do so, you need to be much more aware and cater to females. Another piece is we do all of our own user acquisition in-house. So we haven't spent a penny on third-party affiliate traffic. And again, back to the user experience, we're able to create a unified flow from clicking on an ad to depositing to playing. And that's a huge advantage. And then lastly, we built our own platform in-house, which, again, back to how does this benefit the customer? It allows us to just troubleshoot any issues they may have, right? With payments or KYC or whatever, like we can just react really, really quickly and solve problems quickly. So in summary, like values, and then these are specific things we're doing that express those values.
Justin, I wanted to jump in with a first question here. Appreciate that. I talk about you maybe even a little too much on this podcast as an example of a founder who does a lot of things that I love. And one of the things people have probably heard me talk about before is how when you're pitched by Justin Park and you ask Justin why that button is blue instead of red or why that thing is on the right side instead of the left side, he shows you a diary entry from 7 years ago where he decided every step he was going to take over the next few years that were all going to culminate in exactly the product decision that he just made. And it seems to have worked out beautifully. Is that how you were as a kid? Did you game plan your homework like that? Is that more of a reaction to maybe not so great experiences that you had earlier in your career that you learned from? Where does that come from? And how long back in your personal career does that mentality or approach go?
So big question. And I'm going to just kind of maybe rewind a few years back because I haven't done the full audit yet on everything. The last business I started, which Benjie was an investor in, was called the QL Gaming Group, and we built these analytics products for DFS and sports betting. And we initially monetized through subscription, and we got hit with TAM problems right off the bat. Right? When I say TAM, I mean total addressable market. When you face TAM problems, it is probably the worst feeling like you could ever have as a business owner or founder, like straight up, because there is not an immediate fix. Okay. Usually you decide to go in the corner and die, or you have to reinvent the business. Both of those suck. Okay. So when you have TAM problems, and I've experienced this like viscerally for like 2 years, it was painful. And we eventually like pivoted kind of into the affiliate space and started sending traffic to the operators. But the pain I felt there was so great. I said, I'm never going to feel that again. And what happened after we sold the last business, before we started Betty, it was, I would say, a year of preparation, like literally mapping out everything that we might run into and just start creating some point of view around it. So whether it's user acquisition or platform, even on the platform side, like we're not technical, but we started writing essays on just like how the data should be structured in the back end, because we totally messed that up in our previous business. And it was just that fear of like, never again, you know?
So, Justin, I'm going to build upon that question. And you know, you mentioned I was on the cap table for QL. Full disclosure, I'm also on the cap table for Betty. But I recall when you were in the early stages of Betty, introducing and kind of socializing the topic and creating your first kind of whiteboard, 2 or 3 pagers, as you were going out to potentially round up the folks that you wanted to have involved on the investment. And I recall you saying, one of the things that you were talking about is we're aiming really big on this one, right? Like I forget what the exact words were, but it's like right there in your written documentation, we're thinking really big with Betty. We're taking a really big swing here. And I guess that plays back to some of the mindset and the lessons that you learned with some of the TAM limitations to come into something with less of that. But you know, you're only a year and a half, 2 years into this, and you're public about what your figures are, so people can go to your LinkedIn posts and see them. Are you where you thought you would be 2 years in? Are you surprised by how quickly you've grown? You know, in terms of where your expectations were versus where you are, how would you kind of synchronize that?
Yeah, I guess on the part of having a bigger ambition for this, just like one thing I'd add is it is true that it takes just as much work to build $1 billion company as it does to build a $30 million business, which is what we sold our last one for. And I think part of the reason for that is because if you have a big vision, it's big enough for everyone else's hopes and dreams to be inside of it. And there's this compounding flywheel effect. And that was a key learning from my previous experience, which was that vision was only big enough for really me and a couple co-founders, right? And so, you know, Benjie, back to your question, I feel like execution wise, I think we're at where we wanted to be. Like we had a thesis, which I outlined at the beginning of this, of, you know, building our own platform and doing our own user acquisition. All of that, I think, is expectation. I think the outcome is beyond what we thought in terms of just scale, speed, and back to our values. Like, you know, the experience we're delivering for customers, you can see it in the retention curves. Like people really, really like what we're doing. And that's, I think, beyond expectations. The customer experience.
I guess that's part of the answer to my next question, or maybe it's the entire answer, is just people like it. But one thing I had remembered from our early conversations that I mentioned here before you got on, and I would like you to fact check it or gut check it to see if it resonates. I remember how keen you were in the early days on the UX, resembling more like an HBO Max than a Netflix, for example, and just having lower decision fatigue, more high glossy, easy to find slot thumbnails rather than a million of them strewn all over the screen. And I remember in the early days saying, this pre-seed company has a better slot UX that looks nicer and more professional than all the multi-billion-dollar operators out there. Did that end up being something that you think is somewhat responsible for the success? Do you think people have really enjoyed the UX and just how you lay out and drive the user through the journey? Is that maybe less important in driving how happy people are? Is there something else that you would attribute your customers' success to thus far?
We get a lot of feedback from customers that like our product is very simple, and I think some of that has to do with our aesthetic and just design sensibilities, but I think a lot of it also just comes back to the fact that we only offer slots, and so it's much easier to execute on that than if you have, I like to think of like we're a restaurant that does one thing. We do pizza, okay, and if that's all you do, it's a lot easier than if you're trying to sell. You're at a diner and they have like 75 things on the menu, which is what most operators have. So it's not necessarily, oh, we're so much better or smarter, but it's like it's just easier and more manageable when you're focused. So like that, I think then pervades into the whole experience, which is it's simple. Like all we have is pizza. So it's like, do you want pepperoni, sausage, or supreme?
If I could make it a little more concrete, though, and I'll bring in a story from a couple years ago, and maybe your answer will provide some good insight to founders who I'm sure go up against this all the time. You'll recall, Justin, I had set up a meeting with 3 older, grayer-haired guys in my network, not to be named specifically, but board members of the biggest U.S. operators, some of the largest shareholders, people who have deployed more capital into casino businesses over the last 20 or 30 years than maybe anyone else on earth. And they all said to you, there's no way you're going to be able to hit your CAC projections, and there's no way you're going to be able to compete with the promo spending that other larger operators are going to give out in terms of free spins when you launch. Obviously, they were all incorrect and wrong, despite 20, 30 years of pedigree and experience and data and unit economics. Why were they so wrong? Did they just underestimate how much you could please your customers if you succeed in focusing on only one thing? What is it that some of the, maybe legacy minded folks in the industry got wrong that you guys clearly have been getting right?
Yeah, I mean, probably it's maybe I didn't even pitch it properly to your group, but I said a moment ago that we do all of our own user acquisition in-house, so we have not spent a penny on third-party affiliate. So if it just thought experiment, if we wanted to be an affiliate, we would be a world-class affiliate. So we're buying traffic wholesale, whereas everyone else is paying retail prices. So right there you have massive like margin optimization. And then when you add the fact that we own so here's something that happens for us. If you search, let's say, Big Bass Bonanza, okay, you're going to see a landing page that says Big Bass Bonanza, and you're going to get an offer for free spins for that game. You're going to click into our product. In the reg flow, you're going to have Big Bass Bonanza in every step of the reg flow. After you deposit, you're going to have Big Bass Bonanza, free spins, poof, here they are. You would think that that's simple to do, but it's actually very, very difficult to do because you need to be fully integrated. You need to own the whole value chain. So no other operator is going to be able to do this. And it's, again, simple, but really freaking hard. And it's just like, that's what the user wants. I want that game. Give me the free spins. Where are my free spins? After you deposit, it's like, where are my freaking free spins? It's like, okay, they're right here, dude. That's what it's like on our site.
I'm curious to ask as well, Justin, on your expansion plans here. So you're obviously growing in the current market that you're in, and you've been talking about this McDonald's model of expanding the business. Can you talk more about that model that you will be pursuing moving forward?
Yeah. So, in Ontario, there's a payment method called Interac. It's Canada specific. Benjie knows what it is. I had no idea. Okay. But it's basically like a digital bank transfer that's unique to the market. Like 50% of our volume goes through this thing called Interac. And the amount of time we spent optimizing it and learning about it, it's like a lot. Okay. You add on that upwards of 25% of our dev resources go towards compliance and keeping up with compliance. Like, it's just a lot of work just to maintain a really high quality in one market. So the thought of like doing that having one team do that 15 more times, and you pair it with this ambition to become like a global casino brand. I should take a step back. Our goal is to become the Bet365 of casino. Like, we want to dominate and take over everything. So if you want to do that, and you have all these limitations that like a team has, like, how do you solve for it? Right? And it was just like, okay, you have to like, there has to be another path. There has to be another path. And I think the path is basically like independent teams focusing on specific markets, and you give them all the tools they need to be successful. And I can expand upon what that looks like. That's sort of the genesis of this idea of like, we want to be global, but how the frick are you going to do that?
There isn't really any other examples of the industry at the moment. That you have the Flutters and so on who are acquiring the local hero brands, right? But they are still using a separate brand in order to penetrate those markets. But you seem to be pursuing a completely unique strategy in this kind of licensing of the brand itself into new markets for separate teams pursuing that model.
Yeah, it's actually it's the opposite philosophy. So Bet365 is like a family-owned business. And so my understanding is like Denise Coates and her brother, like, they control the business. And when you have total control, they've expressed it in a certain way, which is they have this like huge office in the UK, and it's like this Death Star that moves around the world, right? I'm saying, great, they killed it. Like, I think she's the greatest of all time. It's the greatest business creator of all time. I think the opposite of that is a fully decentralized, truly federated approach, and I think that also can win. I think both. I think you have to live on one of these extremes to really do something like huge. And so we're taking the other side of it, basically.
Hey, Justin, you spoke earlier about, your previous business and the TAM limitations and selling it for 30 in the 30 million range, et cetera. And there's a number of like first-time entrepreneurs who watch our podcast, who are their first go-around in our space. And if I'm not mistaken, this is your third go-around, and now we hear you talking about creating the Bet365 of casino. And a Justin Park of 7 or 8 years ago probably couldn't have made that statement, but you can make it today and it's credible, right? What are some of the things that you've learned along the way that, some of the younger entrepreneurs that are listening in should be thinking about, that have taken you to where you are in your journey now, and like some of the key learnings that make you capable of building the business you're building now that maybe you weren't capable of building then?
Yeah, from my own personal experience, like, my own, inflection points of personal growth actually coincide with more of a spiritual, emotional growth, particularly knowing that I'm actually not in control. There are way more forces at play, and my job is to find the wave and attach myself to the wave. It's not to create the wave. So all that's to say, I think when you marry the like tactical data, strategy, all that crap, right? And you marry it with faith, that's when things start to really rock. If that makes sense. I don't know if that makes sense. But
yeah.
Whereas I think back when I was building my last business, it was all this one side. It was just like PowerPoint deck, and it was none of the faith. It was none of the, and then also like a shift in values where it's like, actually it's not about really making money. It's really about the journey, having fun, and that's like, I can say that with true sincerity. Yeah, I want to make billions of dollars, but it's more about the journey.
Just on that note as well, you're a third-time founder, and going into starting a business as a first-time founder, there is like a naivete in starting a business where you're like jumping in with excitement. Oh, this is going to be so much fun. And you talked about the pain that you experienced in building the previous business, and that can leave a lot of trauma starting the second business and forward, right? What would you say was the difference just kind of in your mindset when you went into the second and third business? Was it painful knowing that you have that pain ahead of you to become successful when you already experienced it in the past?
Yeah, I think if I were just to like, the one, like the first business, it was, um, I was, I had no experience and I picked a bad market. The second one was I have some experience and I picked a bad market again. Okay. And then the third one is I think I have some experience. I picked a good market. Like that's broadly how it's all broken out. I think if I rewind your first company, I think you're really figuring out, do you even want to be a founder? Like, why are you even doing this? Like, what's your motivation? Like, odds are you should just go home, right? Because it's just not for you, which is great. But then you can go through your life knowing, hey, I tried that thing and I can appreciate whatever opportunity I'm in now, right? I can appreciate more of a structured corporate environment or whatever. Like you'll understand what you need and what's best for you.
Hey, Justin, how do you think about, with Betty, how do you think about the US market, which has been a challenge on the iGaming front? Obviously, you have the sweep space within it, but you have the challenge on the legislated iGaming front as it pertains to the number of states where one can rock and roll. So how do you think about Betty and the US market in general as it pertains to iGaming?
Yeah. So I think we have a plan and the plan is in motion and it's a sick plan. I will say that it's a sick plan. And I can't share too much of it now, but like, I think if it happens, it's like, this is like 3D chess. This is the next level. If you think Betty on Canada was cool, this is just like 10 times cooler. So that's all I have to say about that.
Watch this space. We're going to round off here today, Justin. It's been an absolutely fantastic conversation here. But just as a final question for you, are there any mentors or any particular books that have shaped the way you're thinking in entrepreneurship? If you were to give, say, 3 recommendations of either a book or a mentor that inspired you, what would those be?
I would say, in terms of like a personal mentor, I would say this guy named Rudy Carson has been like, a huge influence on me. He's based in Philly. He started this company called Connexa, which was in the HR technology space and took it public and sold it to IBM. And so he's been, working with me since 2018. So personally there, I think in terms of books, I actually read quite a bit. I would say one that I really like it's called Titan, and it's about John D. Rockefeller, and you just learn the mindset of just the mindset to dominate. Like the mindset these guys had in the 20s is just a different mindset. It was about complete annihilation. And I think that's lost a little bit these days. And then another really good one is the Ray Dalio book, and I'm actually forgetting the name of it, even though it's one of my favorite books. Principles. That one's really good because it teaches you how to think differently. And I think when I add on to that, there's like books on even mental models. Those are huge because back to the question. Starting to use mental models has been a game changer.
Go into that a little bit more, Justin, before we jump off here today. How would you?
So if it's like the kind of the Charlie Munger approach, which is basically there are frameworks to think. And so, and you basically are taking these frameworks off the shelf at any given time and trying to apply them to the situation. So you start thinking in a much more structured way. And that's how you kind of abstract the ego and your own opinion out. And you're kind of using more surgical, like more surgical tools that are not tied to your identity to like break down problems and think about.
Yeah, brilliant. I think first principle thinking would be a good example of a mental model, right? Where
great example.
Yeah, right. Where you are starting at the outcome rather than at the beginning, and you work backwards from there to the basic truth. Yeah, really fascinating. There is so much more to talk about, Justin. We'll have to follow up at some point here. There's been a great discussion. Thank you for sharing the insights, and it's really exciting to follow you and the LinkedIn post that you make when you announce the updates of the company and you lay out the financials for everyone to see. Benjie, Lloyd, thank you so much for the episode today as well. And I'll see you boys in New York in a couple of weeks.
Thanks for coming, Justin. Really enjoyed it.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, guys. Yep. See ya. Bye-bye.